Hello, Archie Dunlop here with Talking Astrology with Archie on Friday, July the 11th, 2025. A few days ago I talked about the conjunction between Saturn and Neptune, which is getting very close at the moment, but it doesn't actually become exact until early next year. But still, they're so close that we can really feel its influence, and maybe also in terms of events. You look at the flooding on February the 4th in central Texas, and I think there is an argument to say that that was very much connected with the Saturn-Neptune conjunction, and yeah, it hasn't gone away. And in this video I want to primarily focus on people who have conjunctions between Saturn and Neptune in their horoscopes. And these people, certainly historically, have been quite important. I'm thinking particularly of the generation of people born in the early 1950s. There was a Saturn-Neptune conjunction sort of around 1952. And, those people born around 1952, a lot of them just haven't gone away. Some of them haven't even gone away even though they're dead. I'm thinking particularly of Jeffrey Epstein. And in this video, I do want to have another look at Saturn and Neptune with particular reference to individuals who have it in their horoscope. But before I talk about Saturn and Neptune again, I want to look at the astrology and the I Ching for today, which is Friday, July the 11th, 2025. So here is the chart for today, as always, set for noon New York time on July the 11th. By the way, if you happen to like this video, do feel free to press the like button. If you're not subscribed, I would be happy to have you as a subscriber. So here is the chart for today, and so at noon New York time, the moon is at 29 Capricorn, getting ready to move into Aquarius. And in fact, the moon moves into Aquarius at 6:21 p.m. London time, which is going to be 1:21 New York time. So if you're in the Americas, sort of late morning, early afternoon, the moon changes sign, and that does create a change. How big a change? Well, the moon is moving from one sign ruled by Saturn to yet another sign ruled by Saturn. So you could say that not a great deal changes with this sign change. And there is very often a general coolness about moon in both Capricorn and Aquarius. Though, maybe when the moon moves into Aquarius, there's going to be more action, more things going on. It's a fresh moon sign. So yeah, if you are in the Americas, then after lunch, certainly after lunch, it could be late morning if you're in California, there's going to be a sense that things are moving a bit faster. Now, if you're in Europe or Africa, then you might not notice that change until this evening. And if you're in Australia, New Zealand, East Asia, then it won't be until tomorrow that the moon moves into Aquarius. So when the moon does move into Aquarius, even before it moves into Aquarius, the last couple of degrees of Capricorn, you can start to feel a few aspects. The moon makes trine to Uranus, sextile to Neptune, sextile to Saturn, sextile to Neptune, and the conjunction to Pluto. Because Uranus, Saturn, Neptune, Pluto are very early in the signs. So when the moon aspects one, it very soon aspects the others. So that might be something to look forward to, perhaps. And additionally, we have a semi-sextile between Venus and Jupiter. Venus is at sort of 7-8 Gemini, Jupiter is at 7 Cancer, and so this semi-sextile could in a general sense, be about the desire to enjoy oneself. Venus and Jupiter are the two benefics, but the semi-sextile can be a rather difficult aspect. So that perhaps we are struggling to enjoy ourselves. We would like to enjoy ourselves, but something is missing. And it might be the social element, Venus semi-sextile Jupiter. We know what we want to do, but are other people on our wavelength? Can we bring everyone together? Or Venus Jupiter is a lucky combination, but that luck may not be immediate. We may actually have to work on it, and we may have to reconcile two forces which don't quite gel. Venus is in Gemini. It's quite a sort of active, positive sign. Jupiter is in Cancer. Maybe Venus needs to calm down a bit, or Jupiter needs to be more open-minded. So you could say that Venus semi-sextile Jupiter is the main aspect going on today, because there's not a huge amount happening, and a lot rests on those lunar aspects that take place in early Aquarius. And while the moon is moving through very late Capricorn, it's not aspecting anything. It's certainly not aspecting any major planets, no major aspects. And so until the moon moves into Aquarius, it may feel that really not a great deal is happening. We can try our hardest, but it just could feel that we're just applying to nothing. And hence this concept of the moon being void of course. So if you're in Europe or Africa, or indeed probably anywhere else in the world that isn't America, the day might just feel unsatisfactory. Yeah, you try hard, but it's just not coming together. But in Europe or Africa, it's perhaps worth hanging on, waiting for the moon to be in Aquarius, and then that's when perhaps the movements start. Of course, if you're in the Americas, you don't have to wait so long. It's late morning, early afternoon. By lunchtime, the moon will be, should be in Aquarius. So that's the picture for New York. Just have a look at Sydney, Australia. And so Sydney, Australia, the moon is earlier in the sign. The moon does not go into Aquarius if you're in Australia or New Zealand. And the moon is at 21 Capricorn at sort of noon. In fact, if you're in Australia or New Zealand, you're still feeling the full moon. I mean, the full moon was sort of earlier on Friday, so that might be the thing that you're still concentrating on, and it's very immediate, and it might be a day when you are thinking about the truth. Hopefully, you're thinking about what is being revealed to you with this full moon. Yet, the full moon having happened, by late morning, early afternoon, the moon's not going anywhere. Yeah, sure, it's moving through Capricorn, but like everywhere else, there just could be a feeling of dissatisfaction. What next? And there might be a lot of promise, but is it going anywhere? Possibly not. And then there is the heliocentric view, putting the Earth at the Sun at the center of the solar system. We still have a conjunction between Venus and Saturn, and it's a couple of degrees apart, but Venus is still impacted by Saturn, and that might say something about relationships, how we get on with people, and things might be rather transactional, thinking about what we can benefit from another, how we can benefit from another person, how we can benefit them. And as far as the lighter side of things, emotional harmony, getting on with someone in an unconditional kind of way, well, that might be difficult with Venus making that conjunction to Saturn, and people are always thinking about, what's in it for me. So that's one interpretation of that aspect, and there isn't really a great deal else going on. So I think I will leave it there. So let me now turn to the 12 signs. So these are my forecasts for the 12 signs for today, which is Friday, July the 11th, 2025. Aries. Aries, it is good to have ambitions, to believe that something really is possible, and to be concrete about it, to think about how you can gain, maybe in a financial way, in terms of power and status. But there comes a point where you think about it again, and you may be asking, what is the point? You know that if you put the work in, you can achieve a great deal, and hopefully over the last couple of days you've made good progress. Whatever was important to you need not be anything to do with work, could be about other ambitions. But it does reach a stage where you are asking why, and you need to look at things in a more sort of broad sense. Where does it all fit in as far as you and your life is concerned? And so there might be some questions there, and you might actually feel a certain amount of limitation, that you might actually be limited by your own ambitions, and that might encourage you to sort of move on and start to think about things on a broader level, and be thinking not just about what you gain in the next couple of weeks, but where are you going? What's happening over the next few years and even decades? And so that might be something that you are thinking about. And as the day progresses, you might relate what you are feeling, what you are experiencing, to other people, perhaps because you need a different perspective, or at least you can benefit from a different perspective. Whether or not you'll find that perspective, is another matter. But you shouldn't regard other people as being useless. I do think that they have something to offer, and probably you have something to offer them. As an Aries, you can be someone who is quite dynamic, and you can make things happen, and it may be especially important to make things happen right now, because if we look at what's going on astrologically, things are slow, at least in theory. That's always the issue with astrology. Astrology does not explain everything. There may be some hugely dramatic event today which just is not picked up by the astrology. But I'm just looking at it from an astrological view, and there are other ways of looking at it. But just purely astrologically, not a great deal going on, and some people might be feeling sort of restless and bored, and they want something to happen. And it might be, Aries, that you can make the best of a rather boring situation, and you can find something, some spark, which is just enough to get people going, to get them across the line. And so if everyone is sort of pausing, they don't know what to do, they're looking for guidance, it might be that you're just the person to get things moving. So that really is the picture today. And don't necessarily count on anything. You might have to do the talking. If you try to listen to what other people are saying, and you give people too much of an opportunity to take the lead or make decisions, and you might be disappointed. Some people are fearful. They've got all sorts of reasons why they can't do something, and so maybe, Aries, you just have to ignore that and just do what you can. You can do something. You can't do everything. You can't be expected to change the world. But yeah, I think it's about you sort of tiding things over and until things start improving. Taurus, there is a lot to think about, and things aren't necessarily straightforward. And as a Taurus, you're capable of being fairly realistic and you can look at things in a sort of very sort of material way and say, well, this can be done, this can't be done, and if something is obvious, well, there's no point in hiding it. And so Taurus, you might reach the conclusion that some things just can't be done, and you've done your calculations, and that's simply the way it is. And this might be reflected in the way you come across, and you have to get the balance right. It's possible, Taurus, that you are overly negative. You can come up with all sorts of reasons why something can't happen, can't be done. I mean, you can think about it logically, but still, you have to accept human nature. People like to have hope. People like to think about possibilities, and so, how do you come over as being realistic without being excessively pessimistic? No one wants to hear, but it can't be done. But the reality is, just many things absolutely are impossible, at least in the short term. And yeah, you right now can be quite realistic about it, and you're quite realistic when you look at other people. You at the moment can really see the limitations of other people. Now, I know that we're supposed to think that anything is possible, all this sort of human potential movement, but it's really so much hot air, isn't it? I mean, if something can't be done, it can't be done. And if someone doesn't have a particular talent, well, very often that talent cannot be gained. Okay, in theory, you can pick up a talent if you work hard enough, but in practice, it's just not going to happen. And so, Taurus, this realism is a bit of a blessing and a curse, isn't it? I mean, it's good to be realistic, and you can be, very realistic about money right now. And Taurus is, of course, a sign that is often associated with money. And if money is not available, then you're going to be very aware of this fact, and I think you will act accordingly. And so, if anyone is being unrealistic, thinks they can do something when the money isn't there, or buy something, then you'll just be able to tell them, this is the truth. This is the way things are going. And so, Taurus, there's nothing wrong with being realistic. You can choose your words, you can try to be tactful, but it doesn't change the fundamental facts. And in some quarters, your honesty and down to earthness, will be appreciated. Now, does this mean that it's going to be a miserable day? Absolutely not. It's a day when you're grounded. You're not going to do anything stupid if you're left to your own devices. And also, the moon is changing sign. Moon is changing sign from Capricorn into Aquarius. And Capricorn and Aquarius are two signs where, from a Taurean perspective, the moon works quite well in anything. Works quite well in Capricorn and Aquarius. All things being equal, if you're a Taurus, these are quite high-profile signs. And so, with the moon starting to move into Aquarius, you are being realistic, yes, but because of your realism, you're starting to see what is possible, and the moon is starting to make a conjunction to Pluto. Now, that conjunction to Pluto is probably going to be strongest if you're in the Americas, but even if you're in Europe or Africa, you will in the end feel it. And that moon conjunct Pluto is powerful, and it kind of reminds you about what you can do, and so you can really get yourself together, but always having your eyes open and being realistic. And so it's a day which is potentially quite fortunate, but it's unlikely to be a fun day, because it really is about you knowing what can be done, and not wasting your time on things which are just impossible, which are just plain fantasy. Gemini, change is in the air. For a long time, the moon has been in Capricorn. When I say a long time, I mean these are daily horoscopes. So when you're looking at daily horoscopes, a day is a long time, 2 days is forever. But the moon is moving out of Capricorn into Aquarius. The moon is moving into an air sign, and that does make things easier. And it allows you to be more positive, more constructive, and some of your doubts can start to dissolve, and you can see the potential in things. That might take time, and it's a transition which will take place over the course of the day, and things reach a point where you realize there's just no more value in being negative. Negativity sort of exhausts itself, and you just start to see the positives in things. And maybe this is just a natural process, the yin and the yang, the yinness and negativity can only reach a certain point, and at a certain stage it does transition into its opposite. And that contrast, you could say, is very much a Gemini thing. Geminis do think a lot, and Geminis can reduce things to nothing, but they can also think that things are possible. They can be optimistic, and part of that is because they live in their heads. They can think about all the things that could happen. Of course, you've still got to think about reality and actually making it happen. But right now, Gemini, I do think that things are getting better, and I think that the moon, when it moves into Aquarius, it makes a trine to Uranus. Remember, Uranus is now in Gemini, is in your sign. I don't know whether you're feeling Uranus in Gemini. I regard that as being quite optimistic, quite sort of exciting. It's about new possibilities. You don't have to accept the status quo, and if you want to overthrow things, you absolutely can. And now that the moon is making a trine to Uranus, and it's also starting to make a conjunction to Pluto, you're in a position where you can create change, and it won't just be a fleeting change. It can be a lasting change, and you now have the vision to think about everything that might be possible. And as far as other people are concerned, I think that at the moment your social skills are pretty good. You know how to relate to people. You can enjoy other people's company. There's something about you that is enthusiastic, well, increasingly enthusiastic. You might start the day with a rather negative approach, but as the day unfolds, as the moon starts to move into Aquarius, okay, it might be more about tomorrow if you're in Australia or New Zealand, but as the moon moves into Aquarius, things do get easier, and you do become more positive. And at the same time, when you're dealing with people, you perhaps have to adjust your approach. There is a semi-sextile between Venus and Jupiter. And Venus is of course in your sign, but it's making a semi-sextile to Jupiter. And so getting on with people on a one-to-one level is certainly possible, but we're dealing with a semi-sextile here. And so the semi-sextile means that you might have to adjust your approach. It's not about just talking. It's also about understanding another person's perspective, and also understanding what another person is excited about. And if you can understand what someone is excited about and tune into that excitement, then that's most of the battle over. You pretty much got them you've got them where you need them, where you have to get them, because you seem to be supportive and encouraging. And if you can be supportive and encouraging and be someone who appears to nurture their ambitions and their enthusiasm, then you should be fine. So relationships look good, provided you're just able to sort of make a few small adjustments to your general approach. Cancer, the moon is changing sign, and so when you've got the moon changing sign, it's often somewhat difficult. I mean, not super difficult, but you've got to sort of transition from sort of one thing to another, and you've just had sort of moon in Capricorn. I mean, moon is still in Capricorn for much of the day, and with the moon in Capricorn, that is the final play with the full moon. So we had the full moon yesterday with the sun in Cancer, moon in Capricorn. So while the moon is in Capricorn, you could say that we're still in this full moon, and so you're still trying to work things through. And this is especially the case when it comes to how you relate to other people. I mean, you hopefully can see people for what they are, and perhaps there are things of a social nature you still have to deal with, and your response is required. But then the moon moves into Aquarius, whether it's today or tomorrow. And when the moon does move into Aquarius, quite possibly you feel more powerful, but at the same time you're more reserved. You want to hold certain things back, and you're able sort of to tune into the power of your feelings. But also with the moon in Aquarius, these feelings can be verbalized to yourself. You don't necessarily have to tell other people what you're feeling, but you can tell yourself what you're feeling, and you kind of know what's important. And the moon, when it moves into Aquarius, it does make a sextile to Saturn, and that moon sextile Saturn is an aspect that does allow you to actually get on with the right people. It's got to be the right people, people who really understand you and respect you. It's not about getting on with anyone. If someone has let you down in the past, you're not going to give them another chance. And additionally, the moon is making a conjunction to Pluto, and if you're looking for change and even transformation, then that transformation takes place, within yourself to begin with, and you don't need anyone's permission. And so you make that change, and you decide what's important, and then you go and stabilize it, because the moon is not just making a conjunction to Pluto; it's also making that sextile to Saturn, and Saturn does allow you to stabilize things. And so, overall, Cancer, it's a day that becomes more serious as it progresses, and it's also a day, I think, where you have an increasing amount of autonomy. And part of the reason you have that autonomy is because you understand all the reasons why in the past you might not have had full control, but a lot of that is connected with that full moon. And so with the immediate stage of the full moon being over, when the moon moves out of the sun, because the sun is in Cancer, when the moon moves out of the Cancer's opposite sign, which is Capricorn, when it moves into Aquarius, the pressure is less, and you can be more of an individual. Leo, you're not happy with second best. You believe that things can really be good, and you have high expectations of yourself, and so do think about that. And ask yourself, how do you make the most of everything you've been given and everything that's available? And there's no absolute set way of doing it. You need to think about what you want to do, and you don't have to do anything in public. If you want to just bide your time in your own way, especially at the beginning of the day, you can, and it might be Leo, but as far as you're concerned, you need to just do some quiet preparations. Make sure that everything is in order, everything is sorted out, and and arguably a lot of preparation is required because you are quite tough on yourself right now. You want things to be as good as possible, and that might be about practice. It might also be making sure that you're addressing bad habits, things that have not been helpful in the past, and so that might be your approach. And I think it's an approach which is the right approach. You don't want to punish yourself, you don't want to be obsessive, but if you can do something better, and if you can be a better person, then by all means go for it. Now, the moon does change sign at some stage today. Okay, it might be tomorrow if you're in Australia or New Zealand. So if you're in the Americas, moon changes sign sort of late morning, early afternoon. In Europe, that would be a sort of early evening. Yeah, in Australia, it would be tomorrow morning, I think. But when the moon changes sign, and that does mean the moon is moving into Aquarius, and of course, the moon moving into Aquarius, well, that is your opposite sign, and that says a lot about other people. And so, at some stage in the day, you might have to be more sociable and more aware of what other people are doing, even what other people are demanding. It doesn't mean you have to give in to them. You just have to know what they want, and then you're in a position to say yes or no. Maybe they're just being unreasonable. And when the moon moves into Aquarius, you become aware of the power relations, but you mustn't exaggerate. The moon is making a conjunction to Pluto in Aquarius, and so there is always a temptation with the moon making a conjunction to Pluto in Aquarius for you to exaggerate how much power another person has. Okay, you should never underestimate someone's power, but it is reasonable power. It's not at a fantastic or supernatural level, anyone's power. Even if they're Rasputin. I think Rasputin was an Aquarius, wasn't he? So I don't know how Leo's would have got on with Rasputin, but you don't want to imagine that anyone out there is Rasputin, because they're not. Everyone is human. Everyone has their own frailties, and even if they appear in a strong position, or if they appear manipulative, it doesn't mean to say that you have to give in to it. And it might just be your imagination, but just be aware and see what is possible. And the moon doesn't just make a conjunction to Pluto, it does make a sextile to Saturn and sextile to Neptune. I mean, I think that's moon sextile Saturn. Perhaps it allows you to work with one particular relationship. It's a relationship that might not be absolutely ideal, but with some realism and hard work, it can at the very least be turned into something useful and maybe even enlightening. But enlightening, not really in a super spiritual level. I mean, we don't want to get involved with Rasputin figures, do we? Virgo, you are at the moment able to deal with lots of different things, and you have the necessary flexibility and tolerance, and that especially relates to the social side of things. I think that socially you're pretty effective at the moment, and you know what's expected of you, and you know how to behave, and in most cases people will enjoy your company. And if you want to meet new people, I think you can. You'll know you'll know what to say, and you will know how to present yourself. And aside from that, there could be a change over the course of the day. you're trying your hardest, I think, to be spontaneous and maybe creative, and to have your own ideas, and to do things your way, on your terms. But there's a limit to how far that can go without having to put in some extra effort. And by the end of the day and into tomorrow, I do think, Virgo, that you will probably be taking things more seriously. You'll start to see that things can't necessarily be taken for granted, and that you need to work at it. And working at it, isn't just about working for the sake of it. It's also about thinking and speculating. Speculation is not necessarily a bad idea, because you have to think about possibilities, and you mustn't be sidetracked by your own prejudices. So you have to be open-minded about really what kind of work is actually required. And because if you're not open-minded, and if you're not flexible, there could be a point, especially at the end of the day and into tomorrow, where you do become a bit obsessed. You want to do something right, you want to do something properly, but it's not 100% easy, and so you just keep going. And well, that could end up being quite exhausting. And the last thing Virgos want to do is exhaust themselves. So yeah, something needs to be done, but just because something needs to be done doesn't mean that you have to go over the top about it. You have to be reasonable. And one aspect we do have today is a sextile between the moon and Uranus. So Uranus went into Gemini on July the 7th, which was Monday. So that was only a few days ago that the moon moves, but Uranus moved into Gemini. And this is a big change for Virgos. As I've already said, I think it is a positive, and it's a positive about your prospects, about what you want to do with yourself, what you want to do with your life. And some of your priorities are changing. They may be in the process of changing actually quite radically, in quite a revolutionary way. And with the moon trine Uranus, you may be looking at your various activities, kind of routines you create for yourself, that you've done things in the same way at the same pace for months and years, perhaps. And now you're looking at things and you're thinking, well, actually, you could be doing things differently. You don't have to do things in the same way, because something has changed. And it may actually be that today, when you start to do something you've got very used to doing, you suddenly ask yourself, why are you doing it? Does it serve any further useful purpose? And the answer might be no. And so it's possible, Virgo, that this might be a time where you change some of your routines, or you just get rid of them. But if you get rid of one routine, you bring in something new. And so perhaps you need to change the structure of your day to just take into account a new reality. And it's a new reality which is not going to go away. I mean, Uranus is going to be in Gemini for some time. Okay, it does briefly go back into Taurus later in the year, but overall, if you look at the next 7 years or so, Uranus is solidly in Gemini. So perhaps you need to start preparing for that change. And now with the moon trine Uranus, is a good a time as any to make a start. Libra, you're not necessarily your normal self. You are maybe being more thoughtful than usual, more analytical, and perhaps realistic. With Librans, they sometimes have a reputation for sort of being the kind of people that they don't say no. They say yes to everything. and then sort of later on, in their own quiet way, they just find ways of not honouring their promises. It's not that Librans will actively agree to everything, but just in terms of that social interaction, where it's just more convenient to say yes than no. But that's not really about you today. I think that today you're probably more realistic than usual, more down to earth, and you can see what is possible, and you see the limitations of other people, I think, and also certain situations that you might have been optimistic about in the past, vaguely optimistic, but now you see reality, for what it is, and I think you're going to be quite honest about this reality. So you're going to be quite good right now about giving bad news. If you need to tell someone that something is not going well, that they need to revise their plans, or you need to tell someone that you don't approve of something, that you're not going to cooperate. Indeed, if you want to say no to someone, then I think you're going to be able to do it. It's going to be easier than usual. So, if you want to be tough, especially on a verbal level, I think you can be, and you'll find that it's actually quite easy. And also, Libra, it might occur to you that something is finished. I mean, you've known that it was finished for a long time, but you hadn't fully realized. Maybe it was a full moon. The full moon is about the truth, understanding things for what they really are. So the full moon happens, you realize something is finished, something is over, and you're able to be honest about it. And so it could be a great day for saying goodbye. You don't literally have to say goodbye, but you can take action to cut yourself off from things which are no longer serving any useful purpose. So it is a day for creating boundaries, and for creating temporal boundaries between the past and the future. So that if you want to move into the future, you have to let go of the past, and also if you want to enjoy the future, you have to let go of the past, and you have to look at yourself. You have to look at what is actually important to you and hold on to it, and everything else is negotiable. And with the moon changing sign, moving out of Capricorn into Aquarius, and that movement might not happen until tomorrow if you're in Australia, but when that movement happens, you might actually feel a great sense of relief that if something is over, that you're now able to be more positive, more optimistic. And the moon, when it moves into Aquarius, it makes a trine to Uranus. So the moon is not just making a trine to Uranus, but it's also making a trine to Libra in general. So moon trine Uranus allows you to sort of not just break from the past, but start to embrace the possibilities of the future. And the possibilities of the future are about you doing what you want to do, and spending time with the people you want to hang out with, people you find that are enjoyable, that are stimulating, and aligning yourself to that future. I do think that really matters. And of course, we also have a conjunction between the moon and Pluto. And moon-Pluto conjunctions can be obsessive. And when we look at the word obsessive, it often has negative connotations. Obsessive compulsive disorder, for example. But there's nothing wrong with being obsessive. I think we have to be obsessive sometimes, because if something is important and is a fundamental part of who we are, then it's good to be obsessed about it. We can't develop knowledge and familiarity with something unless we are obsessed, and we can actually enjoy being obsessed. So don't be worried about obsession, provided that obsession is healthy. Now, how do you know whether an obsession is healthy? Well, you've got to use some judgment, and you've got to be realistic. And today, Libra, I think that actually you are very realistic. Scorpio. Scorpio, we have the moon changing signs, and it's moving out of Capricorn and into Aquarius. So moon moving into Aquarius, okay, it does happen every month. It's not an unusual event. But, this time round, a moon moving into Aquarius, you are now aware that something has changed. So you might arrive at somewhere you've been to 100 times before, 1,000 times before. It all feels familiar. Yet it feels very different. And the reason it might feel different is because the moon, when it's now moving into Aquarius, it's now making a trine to Uranus, and that moon trine Uranus really could stir things up, and it's possibly about your emotional response. It's not that anything has changed out there, and so it could be a kind of a separate reality, sort of a separate reality, like everything is there physically, it all seems to be in place, but you somehow know that everything at the same time has changed. And and it could be connected with that Uranus in that Uranus in Gemini, and that Uranus in Gemini potentially is about your emotional response. Your emotional response has changed, and it's perhaps an emotional response that is more autonomous. It's not about other people, and you trying to respond to other people. It's more primal than that. It's about who you are and who you are not, and there is then a question of familiar. Just because something has felt familiar for a long time doesn't mean that it's always going to be familiar. And maybe you'll suddenly think, well, hold on, you're in the wrong place, and it will just suddenly occur to you. And if you want to get spiritual about it, you might say, well, you're getting closer to an old memory that may predate your own existence, and you're making a contrast to an old memory, and you're thinking either this is not where you should be, or we could look at it in a completely different way. You go somewhere you've never been before, and it just feels incredibly comfortable or incredibly familiar, and there's no reason why it should be familiar. And there might be feelings of déjà vu with that trine between sort of moon and Uranus, but it is fleeting, and it just might be about you getting used to something. You getting used to Uranus being in Gemini. So if you have a strange feeling about a place, don't worry about it. It's just a question of acclimatizing to something, and then there is a question of what do you do. Is it a day where you just have to be passive and listen to your feelings and respond to your feelings? Well, you could if you wanted to, but if you want to make changes, if you want to be noticed, Scorpio, then you absolutely can be noticed. People will be very interested in what you have to say and what initiatives you have up your sleeve. So if you feel that you absolutely need to take an initiative, then when the moon moves into Aquarius, I think that is something you can do, and you can actually really get attention. And it may be that the drama and immediacy of what you're asking for is going to get everyone's attention, and people will be prepared to listen and, in most cases, follow your lead. Sagittarius. Right now, you are aware that you are not alone, that you are part of something, and what happens in one place does affect you. Even if something happens a million miles away, it still affects you. And so you could regard yourself as being a global citizen. And we use that term in quite sort of a casual way, but what does it actually mean to be a global citizen? Well, I would actually see that not as someone who just travels around. I would see it as something quite collective, and it means that what happens everywhere has an impact on you, for better or for worse. And you can feel the growth and the possibilities, but you can also feel the decay and the despair, and that might be just all part of your existence at the moment and what you're feeling. And you do not feel alone, and you do feel that you are part of something. And being part of something, especially on a collective level, when you can't entirely put your finger on it, can be scary, because if it's not about you, if it's about everything, then where does it stop? The boundaries get knocked over, and you might feel that you might be swept away. But what do you do? Well, one thing you can do is you can discuss the matter, and over the next couple of days, Sagittarius, if something is bothering you, do feel free to talk about it. And it's not about being polite. Politeness is really not going to get you anywhere, because politeness is just going to maintain the status quo, and maintaining the status quo just means stagnation, and stagnation can be worrying. So do be ready to bring things out into the open, and don't be afraid of causing a stir. The moon is making a conjunction to Pluto, the moon is making a trine to Uranus, and so these are sort of quite heavy duty aspects involving the outer planets. And so if you want to talk about things which might be complex or difficult, now might absolutely be the time to do it. Now, one aspect we do have today is a semi-sextile between Venus and Uranus. Sorry, Venus and Jupiter. So Venus and Jupiter are 30 degrees apart. And this Venus-Jupiter aspect might have something to do with relationships. So Jupiter in Cancer could represent you and your particular view and the way you're trying to work everything out. And that things aren't quite as easy as you thought they were. And Venus may represent another person who has a message or has a particular stance which, to begin with, you are not necessarily sympathetic to. You don't necessarily agree with this other person. But it's a semi-sextile. It's not an opposition. And a semi-sextile is challenging you to bring two things together. So it could be another person with a different approach has something to offer. And it may even be about an existing relationship. There may be some aspect of an existing relationship which is bothering you, and it's tempting to think that you're in the right and they're in the wrong, but that is not necessarily the case. It just may be a case of trying to accommodate another person's view, which it's a view which is important, which you need to, not necessarily accept, but you certainly need to take it into account. Capricorn, the moon is moving out of your sign. So with the moon moving out of your sign, that does mean that the full moon is over, at least the immediate stage of the full moon. There is this question about how long full moons last for, and you could say that the full moon only lasts for a day, or you could say it only lasts for a split second while it's exact, although there is a view that a full moon can last a couple of weeks. If it's an eclipse, well, some people are saying that full moons can last for years. I think there's always a problem, though, with saying that an astrological event lasts for years. For example, one sort of astrological technique is to look at eclipse paths, and so an eclipse will have a path, and you might say that, oh, this particular place was on the eclipse path, and so that's going to hang around for years, and so several years later something happens to this place, and you say, oh, well, it's the eclipse path, and that explains it. But there is a problem there, that if you allow too much time to elapse, you reach a stage where you can use astrology to explain absolutely everything, and you're never wrong. So I'm just a bit wary of allowing too much time to pass. I mean, there are examples of astrology working in that level, in that way, sort of years later, when you're sure it really is manifesting. For example, in August 1914, was it August 1914? There was an eclipse at 29 Regulus in 1914, as the First World War was starting, and then in 1918 Saturn rolled over Regulus pretty much exactly the same time as the First World War came to an end. And of course Regulus is a royal star, and so the eclipse on Regulus in 1914 represented the ending of royal houses. It was promising collapse of European royalty. And 4 years later, when Saturn hit the degree of that eclipse 4 years earlier, that's when it happened. So sometimes there is a value in just allowing things to take their time to work. But I think in most cases we should be looking at things taking place on a fairly immediate level. And as far as this full moon is concerned, it is across the main axis of your chart, and so I would give it a couple of weeks, and perhaps less. The moon is now leaving Aquarius. The moon is now leaving Aquarius. It's leaving Capricorn, so it's no longer in the opposite sign to the sun. So yeah, certainly the immediate phase of this full moon is over, and the moon is now moving into Aquarius. It's starting to make a sextile to Saturn, and it's a conjunction to Pluto. And yeah, moon moving into Aquarius, making these aspects, is quite possibly Capricorn related to money. I mean, that's an obvious way of looking at it, because Aquarius is a sign following Capricorn, and so you might be thinking about money and what you need to do with money. And moon sextile Saturn strikes me as being quite useful. You can think about money in a constructive way and work out the best strategy for managing it. Of course, I'm not giving any financial advice here. And with moon conjunct Pluto and moon making a trine to Uranus, it might occur to you that perhaps in the past you hadn't necessarily been quite as responsible as you should have been with money, or you hadn't paid enough attention to it. And maybe right now, with those two aspects, you might be thinking, hold on, you've got to pay attention, you've got to find out what's going on. So if you've been deliberately trying to ignore some aspect of your financial life or some aspect of your finances, then now might be actually a very good time to really making it clear that you want answers, and perhaps that you're ready to make some changes. Additionally, there is moon sextile Saturn at some stage in the day. Okay, it could be into tomorrow, but with moon sextile Saturn, that just helps as far as other people are concerned. It's easier to get on with people, and one reason it might be easier to get on with people is that you can get to the point. And if there's been something in the background, some matter that you and someone else hadn't been ready to discuss, could be about money, perhaps now is a time to to talk about it. And once it's discussed, then you've got something over with, and so that might be good for the development or preservation of some of the relationships you're in. Aquarius, don't underestimate yourself. You are in quite a good position, and you are able to make things happen, and you're certainly able to get noticed. So if there's anything that you're unhappy about, then let everyone know. And it is a time when you can bring to bear considerable power and energy. Might not feel like that, especially at the beginning of the day. You might feel that you just want to be yourself. You don't want to interact or engage, but that's a temporary state. And as the day gets underway, as the moon moves from out of Capricorn and into Aquarius, you start finding your pace, and you realize what you can do, and you realize that there are real possibilities out there. And if anyone is in your way, or if there's something that seems to be holding you back, then Aquarius, you can create change, and you can show some anger if you want to. And if you show a bit of anger, that should be enough. Now, you don't want to necessarily take it too far. There is some possibility that Aquarians, do exaggerate. Perhaps it's about using more force than you have to. Or, additionally, or alternatively, you do have a lot of energy, but if you don't use that energy in a constructive way, it might backfire. So if, for example, you get annoyed about something and you decide you're not going to tell everyone how you feel, and you feel this annoyance, then that annoyance might just manifest elsewhere in ways that aren't necessarily desirable or controllable. So that might mean that you have to be careful if you do something rashly. And if you could be doing something rashly, you could be driving a car rashly, you could be operating machinery rashly, and there could be an emotional content to your rashness. And in that kind of situation, you might be taking a risk, because there is a danger of an accident or mishaps or something like that. So if you do feel that something needs to be done, something needs to be said, when I say something needs to be done, I mean in a constructive way. I don't mean breaking the speed limit or using dangerous equipment. But if you feel that now is a time when you do need to take an initiative, then you should not be afraid, and things will be easier than expected, especially once the moon moves into Aquarius. Because when the moon moves into Aquarius, it makes a sextile to Saturn. That's a very fortunate aspect, that moon sextile Saturn, and you will actually feel that moon sextile Saturn even before the moon moves into Aquarius. But when the moon moves into Aquarius, it will be very much there, and this is a time when you can tell everyone what's on your mind, and I think that people will listen. And additionally, you're going to be quite exciting, because the moon isn't just making a sextile to Saturn, it's making a trine to Uranus, and the moon trine Uranus is an aspect that perhaps will remind you that something has changed, that Uranus has left Taurus and is now in Gemini. And from an Aquarian view, I would have said that Uranus in Gemini is kind of far more constructive than Uranus in Taurus. It's less problematic. And with moon trine Uranus, you're thinking about all the things that you can do, and you are fundamentally an interesting and exciting and original person, and you can really start to bring that out, and you've got time to do it in. I mean, Uranus is going to be in Gemini for the next 7 years. Okay, it does briefly go back into Taurus later in the year, but that's very brief. And so that might say something about your energy and any frustrations you might feel. If you do feel any frustration, it's because you're not doing what you should be doing. You're not doing what you want to do. And I do think, Aquarius, there is a day when you can do what you want to do, and in the process you can be powerful and very impressive. Pisces, we've had the full moon. I don't know how you felt about the full moon. It wasn't a full moon that need have been especially powerful for you. I mean, there were some insights to be gained. But now that the moon is moving into Aquarius, things possibly are starting to slow down for you. Okay, you may not want things to go quickly. You're aware that things could be complicated, that there are things that you might want to deal with or perhaps have to deal with, but you have to deal with them now. I think the answer is probably not. And so you could say, Pisces, it's a day for just acclimatizing to a changing situation and not feeling that you have to be pressured or that you have to worry. And when we talk about worry, Pisces, there is a possibility that you worry about things that you can do absolutely nothing about, and that in some respects are simply not your concern. And you might just take on board other people's worries, society's worries, or even society's disgust. You might just take it on board and try to personalize it. And it's nice that you're so sensitive. It's nice that you're so connected to the collective, but it's not necessarily going to help you. It just might make things more complicated. Though if you can create the right level of boundaries and separation, then maybe you can benefit from having an awareness of everything, of the unpleasantness and dirt and mess that is all around us. You can be aware of it, but you will have to ask yourself why. What is the point? There's no point in being aware of something if you can't do anything about it. At least you might argue that. I mean, if you're doing nothing about it and it's just something that's festering, something's festering on this planet on which you live, it's only worth knowing about it if you can do something about it. And maybe, Pisces, you feel that you can do something. If something offends you, then perhaps work out what you can do. In your own way. I mean, you can't change the world probably, but you can raise awareness if you feel up to it, and you might not feel up to it. So I do think that you shouldn't necessarily feel that you have to be pressured. And one aspect we do have that might be relevant to you is a semi-sextile between Venus and Jupiter. And remember, Jupiter is your ruler, and Jupiter's doing well. It's exalted in Cancer, but it's challenged by Venus in Gemini. And so we might say that Jupiter in Cancer is about you trying to be yourself, trying to make the most of everything that is around you. But what is that challenge? Something about your home, it could be. It could be another person wanting your attention. It could be a member of your family, or it just could be a feeling of obligation. Maybe you feel you've forgotten something, or someone requires some more attention, or maybe just someone is talking too much. I mean, you might not realize they're talking too much at the moment, but they might be making a lot of demands, saying lots of things. You feel you have to pay attention to them. You don't really want to pay attention to them, but you don't feel you don't have a choice. And because of that, you might lose touch, with yourself, and who you are. And going back to this fact that it's a Venus semi-sextile Jupiter, it just could be that in order to really be fulfilled with this Venus semi-sextile Jupiter, you have to pay attention to something without being controlled by it. And that is something that you can do. I'm not saying it's going to be easy, but I do think it is possible. And that is it. Those are my forecasts for the 12 signs. And it's now time to look at the I Ching. So I asked the question, what is Friday going to be like for those watching the I Ching section of this video? And the first hexagram I got was hexagram number 35, which is progress. And this hexagram doesn't move, no moving lines. And so because there are no moving lines, today might feel slow. And we get this from the astrology as well, because for much of the day, and perhaps all of the day, if we're in Australia and New Zealand, the moon is moving through late Capricorn. It's made its aspects. It's made the full moon aspect, moon opposition sun. But now, where is it going? It's not really going anywhere. The moon is void of course. And so, however enthusiastic we are, we think that there are real possibilities out there. We feel we can make progress, but just it may be not even difficult. I mean, if it was difficult, then at least we'd have something to attack, but we don't even have something to attack. So we make progress, but it's not very satisfactory progress, because we don't feel that there's anything to really get our teeth into. And so that might be just how the day does unfold. We are getting somewhere, but it's just rather vague, and it may just take a long time before we actually start to see real results. But we shouldn't be disappointed, and maybe we should even be relieved, because there are no moving lines, it means there's no conflict, there's no pressure. Maybe we can make progress in whatever way we want. We might not make a lot of progress, but we'll kind of feel we're getting somewhere. And in order to understand what this hexagram is about, it can sometimes be useful to look at the nuclear hexagram, just to get an idea about the underlying picture. And the nuclear hexagram of this is hexagram number 39. And 39 obstruction. It's about not making progress. It's about being stuck. We're in a situation where we can't move forward, because if we try to move forward, we'll fall over. And we can go back if we want. We can possibly stay where we are, but we just have to wait it out, wait for the situation to change, wait for help, wait for us to have an inspiration. But that's the underlying picture. So we do feel that we aren't making much progress. We feel blocked. And so with this hexagram 35, it's better for nothing. We kind of know we're getting somewhere, and we have to believe that we're getting somewhere, but we just can't expect a great deal to be happening. And this possibly reflects what's going on astrologically, for many of us, particularly while the moon is in late Capricorn. And maybe when the moon does move into Aquarius, that's when we'll start to get that progress. And just remember that the moon moves into Aquarius at different times for different people. So if you're in California, the moon moves into Aquarius, late morning on today, Friday. If you're in Australia or New Zealand, it doesn't move into Aquarius until tomorrow. So although this is an I Ching reading, it's not actually based on the astrology. It is independent. We need to respect the I Ching and not feel that it plays second fiddle to astrology. That is absolutely not the case. But there does seem to be a certain match between the astrology and I Ching. So in the end, we can make progress, but just don't expect it to be rapid progress. And the key thing is to keep things moving, and even if we're not getting very far, that should be regarded as being good enough. And now I want to return to Saturn and Neptune. I mean, I've already talked about Saturn and Neptune, but I talked about Saturn and Neptune in quite a collective way, and I was sort of trying to speculate about, what it might mean. And this Saturn-Neptune conjunction is not actually exact until February of next year, but it's just getting really close. It's so if we look at the astrology for today, for example, and we look at where Saturn and Neptune are. Let's just switch to the putting Aries on the left. So if you look at Saturn and Neptune, you can see that they are now 14 arc minutes apart, and Saturn is about to go retrograde over the weekend. Saturn is retrograde, so it's almost as close as it gets. And I was thinking about what Neptune is and what it does mean, and one approach one can use to work out what planet means is to look at the discovery chart. And here is the discovery chart for Neptune. I don't know about the time, but I think it's at September 24th, September the 24th, 1846. I think it was in Berlin that it was discovered. And the positions of the planets when it was discovered, Saturn was conjunct Neptune in Aquarius. And we think about Neptune as being the opposite of Saturn, the anti-Saturn. That is a temptation to see Neptune as the anti-Saturn, but I'm not 100% convinced about that. Especially with relationship with regard to this chart. If Neptune was conjunct Saturn at the time of Neptune's discovery, it is possible that there is a Saturnine feel to Neptune, incredible as that might sound. And maybe we have to think about what is the experience of a Neptune transit. Neptune transits can be about fantasy and hope, but they can also be about disappointment. There can be this despair with a Neptune transit. I guess it depends on the transit. A lot of Neptune transits actually we don't feel, but I think that with Saturn and Neptune, it's also about taking something and making it real. And so Neptune is a planet which is really very, very collective, and we take what's in the collective, and we try to realize it. We try to even the action of saying Neptune in Aquarius or Neptune in Aries, that in a way is Saturnine, because I'm trying to define something that is collective, something collective that cannot be touched. I'm trying to describe it. And so the very act of saying, oh, it's Neptune in Aries, it's Neptune in Pisces, it's Neptune in Aquarius, that is an act of Saturnizing something, making something real, at least real in the sense that I can symbolize it. So there is something in a way that is Saturnine about Neptune. There's something Saturnine about defining anything. And it's kind of interesting that with this in this discovery chart, it's also linked to other outer planets. Neptune was sextile Pluto at the time of the discovery, and Saturn was sextile Pluto. Okay, but Neptune has been sextile Pluto for on and off for quite a long time. Well, of course, what we have there is, of course, it was the waning sextile between Neptune and Pluto. So we were coming up. Neptune was moving towards the conjunction of Pluto. So the conjunction with Pluto was in the I think it was in the 1890s. There was a Neptune-Pluto conjunction. I think my grandfather was born around 1890, and I think he had a Neptune-Pluto conjunction in his chart, and that might have said something about the experience of people who were fighting in the First World War. And I don't think he didn't fight in the First World War. He was just training to be a priest, I think, during the First World War, or just finished training. But that's so Neptune-Pluto. With Neptune-Pluto, we had the conjunction, and then we had the waxing Neptune-Pluto cycle once Neptune had moved beyond that conjunction to Pluto. And so I do think that is an important chart. And then there is the question of how do people experience having a Saturn-Neptune conjunction, and does it matter? I mean, I think it actually might matter. So if we take a really early example of someone with a Saturn-Neptune conjunction, is Charles II. Charles II of England. And Charles II of England, his father was beheaded, Charles I. He became King of England in 1660, and he reigned, I think, for 20 years or so or more. And he's famous for the Restoration, when the monarchy was restored, and it was a time of the flowering of sort of art and culture and literature and drama, and so he had a Saturn-Neptune conjunction in his horoscope. So you could say that here is someone in general who was plugged into the collective in terms of what was going on in the sort of middle of the 17th century, because the middle of the 17th century in European history was really quite dramatic, because in the early 17th century you had religious wars, you had incredible religious intolerance, and by the end of the 17th century, people had just burnt themselves out, and by the end of the 17th century you had the beginning of the Enlightenment, and people were more tolerant, and it was a slow process. But so he was kind of bridging that change, and he had a dissociate Saturn-Neptune conjunction, Saturn in Libra, a nice place for Saturn. Saturn exalted in Libra, conjunct Neptune in Scorpio. So maybe having that Saturn-Neptune conjunction, particularly a dissociate conjunction, represents a man who was living in the middle of the 17th century, and who was representative of that changeover from the brutality of religious wars to the slow beginning of the Enlightenment, at least from an English perspective. And someone born later is Mohammed Mossadegh. We're talking about Mossadegh a lot. I mean, if you look at the newspapers and how people are reporting on Iran and Israel's attack on Iran and what's going on in Iran, people mention Mossadegh. Iranians are very aware of Mossadegh, and it may be that with the Saturn-Neptune conjunction, what we have now, people are thinking more about people who have Saturn-Neptune or had Saturn-Neptune conjunctions, and you can see that Mohammed Mossadegh had a Saturn-Neptune conjunction in his horoscope. Now, who was Mohammed Mossadegh? He was an Iranian politician who was elected president of Iran in the early 1950s, and he wanted to nationalize the oil industry. Seems a reasonable thing to do, but the British and the Americans weren't so happy about that, so they organized a coup, and he was replaced by the Shah, and the Shah might have been pro-Western, but it had absolutely vicious secret police, and in the end because of the Shah. The Shah's regime was overthrown, and that's why we've got the regime we have now in Iran. And so having that Saturn Neptune square, which is Saturn Neptune conjunction, maybe the square Mars as it is linked to that. So Saturn Neptune in Taurus. Now Taurus, you could say that Taurus is about the reserves. If you're president of Iran, you perhaps are thinking about your country and its resources, your country's natural wealth, its oil, and so that's what he regarded as being important. He was tuned into that, but it was resources that undid him and led to him being overthrown. And another person who had a Saturn Neptune conjunction was the former Archbishop of San Salvador, who was assassinated by right-wing death squads, I think in was it 1979 or 19 here is Oscar Ramiro's horoscope. So Oscar Ramiro had a Saturn Neptune conjunction in Leo, and quite a close Saturn Neptune conjunction in Leo, and lots of people would, of course, have had a Saturn Neptune conjunction. Anyone sort of born around the time of 1917, the tail end of the First World War, would have had that Saturn Neptune conjunction. But it was his Saturn Neptune conjunction, and we have to ask, how did he use it? And so, if you're dealing with someone who is a priest, and you've got a Saturn Neptune conjunction, well, that makes sense, doesn't it? I mean, Neptune represents one's faith and one's belief, and one wants to make it real. And so, if you're in a Catholic country, becoming a priest would be a way of using the energy of that Saturn Neptune conjunction. And Neptune is also about idealism, believing that you've got to look after the poor. And this might not have been immediately apparent before he was made Archbishop of San Salvador. I think that he was actually seen as being quite conservative before he was elevated to this position. But as soon as he got to this position, he did become more radical, and he did start to really care about the poor and also human rights abuses, and that's what got him killed. But he is a man who became a saint because he was canonized. It took him a long time to get canonized, but in the end he got canonized because he was murdered saying mass. And so the Saturn Neptune, there is something potentially quite saintly about that. You can see that in the chart of a saint, and making that compassion real. So I think that is an example, perhaps a good example, of using the Saturn Neptune conjunction. Now, as far as what's happening now and what is relevant now, I really want to think about that Saturn Neptune conjunction in the early 1950s, because I think that Saturn Neptune conjunction in the early 1950s is actually casting a very long shadow, because a lot of those people who were born in the early 1950s are still around. They're not just still around, they are still having a huge influence. In fact, you could argue that right now, in the world in which we're living, the most influential people are people who have Saturn-Neptune conjunctions. And that I find completely fascinating. So I'm thinking, if you've got a Saturn-Neptune conjunction, you're not someone to be taken lightly. And so we'll start with the most obvious, someone we've all heard of, and that is Vladimir Putin. Everyone talks about Putin this, Putin that, Putin's war. Of course, this war would have been going on if Vladimir Putin hadn't have existed. If Russia had a czar or a president or a general secretary, it would have still been at war with Ukraine. It's not about Putin. It's not Putin's war, but still, he is in control of Russia. He's not a dictator, as some people say. There are many different groups in Russia that have to be taken into consideration, but there's no doubt he has a lot of power, and he has a Saturn-Neptune conjunction, and he is coming up to 73, and he's still in control. I mean, of course, people have been saying that he's dying for a long time, but he still seems to be pretty alive, and his mind seems to be pretty sharp. And so there is his Saturn-Neptune conjunction. His Saturn is in Libra, and it's exalted in Libra. And you might say that Neptune represents some kind of fantasy, a fantasy about Russia. But maybe that's not the way it's all about. Maybe Saturn and Neptune is just something, very collective. We talked about Russia and the Saturn-Neptune cycle, a couple of days ago. Remember, in 1917, with the Russian Revolution, there was a Saturn-Neptune conjunction. There was a Saturn-Neptune conjunction in 1950. Well, obviously at the time that Putin was born, when Stalin died, and there was a Saturn-Neptune conjunction in 1989 when communism collapsed in Eastern Europe. So, Vladimir Putin, don't forget, was working in East Germany as, I think was he working in the KGB, something like that, as an agent in East Germany. So he experienced this Saturn-Neptune conjunction and the breakup of communism in Eastern Europe, and he's linked in with it with his Saturn-Neptune conjunction. So it's kind of not surprising that he's responding to these crises, and he's still very influential, no doubt about it. But he is not the only person who is very influential. Someone born very close to Vladimir Putin. So Vladimir Putin was born on October the 7th, 1952. Imran Khan, former Prime Minister, is that right? Prime Minister of Pakistan. 2 days earlier, was also born with a Saturn-Neptune conjunction. I think he's in prison. I mean, he was Prime Minister of Pakistan. Then he was overthrown. He was forced out. I think it was largely on the prompting of the United States, because he didn't like his neutrality. He was trying to be neutral between Russia and Ukraine. He wasn't taking sides, and I don't think the Americans approved that. And of course, they've got connections with the Pakistani army, and so that's how he got removed. But he hasn't gone away. His influence has not gone away, and he has a Saturn-Neptune conjunction, and you can see in his case. And of course, we don't know the time of birth for Imran Khan. I mean, there are times of birth around for Imran Khan. But we don't know for sure when he was born, and so Imran Khan, he sort of manifests the uncertainty of that Saturn-Neptune conjunction, the fact that he's in prison, or certainly was in prison, because for political reasons, and so there might be links there, with Mossadegh, with his Saturn-Neptune conjunction, was trying to bring about change in Iran, but he was overthrown. And likewise, Imran Khan was just trying to make some fine-tuning to Pakistani's foreign policy. But that didn't go down well with the United States. And who is the most powerful person in the world if it's not Vladimir Putin and it's not Donald Trump? Well, it could be Xi Jinping, sorry if I've mispronounced that, the General Secretary of the Chinese Communist Party, was born on June the 15th, 1953. And he was born on a Saturn-Neptune conjunction. So so that means he's coming up, he's going to be 70, he's just had his 72nd birthday, and he's still alive and well, and still very powerful. And his Saturn in Libra, he is still there, and it may be that part of the strength of a Saturn-Neptune conjunction is, if there's a strong Saturn, it is able to take Neptune. Neptune represents the collective. And Saturn-Neptune, remember that there was a Saturn-Neptune conjunction in 1846 when Neptune was discovered. And so Saturn and Neptune Saturn can take the hopes and fears and ideals and fantasies of the wider population and can seize them and make them real, or appear to make them real. And that's perhaps why Saturn-Neptune conjunction people just have so much power and perhaps have so much longevity, at least the crop of people born in the 1950s. And it's not just it's not just Xi Jinping who and Putin who are powerful. There are all sorts of conspiracy theories. Now, who is the most powerful person in the UK? Is it Keir Starmer? Probably not. Some would say that the most powerful person in the UK is Tony Blair. Tony Blair, again, he has not gone away, and the long shadow of Tony Blair is still with us, even though he hasn't been Prime Minister since 2007 for nearly 20 years. There is a Tony Blair Institute. His institute, and they're trying to have an influence on policy, and so he's just had his 72nd birthday. He's got a Saturn-Neptune conjunction, and this is just another example of someone who doesn't go away. And of course, Tony Blair was a very effective politician. He won 3 elections. I think, was it 3 elections he won? He won the 1997 election. He won the 2001 election, and I think there was another one. I think he won 3. He won 3 elections. So he got something right. And I remember the 1997 election when he beat the Tories. There was a huge amount of hope in the air. Things are going to get better. That was the view, and they did get better for a time. And that maybe he's using his Saturn-Neptune conjunction in a really quite sort of constructive way. He's able to, with that Saturn in Libra, make it real, personify the hopes and fears and wishes of the electorate. And as far as a couple of other people, well, people who are not necessarily politicians, but who have not gone away. Jerome Powell, chair of the Federal Reserve, born February the 4th, 1953. He's still there. Again, one of the most powerful people in the world. Chair of the Federal Reserve. He's not going. Donald Trump wants him to go. He wants someone who's going to reduce interest rates, but Jerome Powell has put his foot down. And what he says, the things Jerome Powell says, have a huge impact on the economy. He just has to say 2 words, and the stock market can fall 5%, or not 5%, but maybe 1 or 2%. Or dollar can do this, that, whatever. And so he's got. We don't know what time of birth, what time he was born, but he's got Moon, Saturn, Neptune in Libra. And so whatever you think of him, and I don't think much of Jerome Powell, he has that Saturn Neptune conjunction, and he is someone who can control a huge amount of people through his pronouncements and through what he can do as chair of the Federal Reserve. And if you think about France, now France has got a relatively young president, but still, even with Macron, born in 1977, the Saturn-Neptune conjunction casts its shadow, because Macron, he decided to get married to a Saturn-Neptune conjunction in the form of his wife. Even though there's a huge age difference, there's Brigitte Macron and there's her Saturn-Neptune conjunction. So Macron is linked to this ruling conjunction, this conjunction in the early 1950s, which continues to dominate our lives through the people who have it, through the people who influence power. Even if they're not formal presidents, like Tony Blair, they're still having an influence. And like Brigitte Macron, she doesn't have a formal position, but somehow she does have an influence. I'm sure that Macron, by marrying Brigitte, it must have helped his career in some way, probably in quite a huge way. I don't think he would be president if he hadn't have married Brigitte Macron. And I don't know why. It could be about the impact of marrying this kind of woman. Getting involved with a much older woman at an early age could have somehow given him political skills he wouldn't have had otherwise. But still, she casts her influence. And so Macron's choice of wife really does illustrate the power of Saturn Neptune. And even if you're dead with Saturn Neptune conjunction, you continue to have an influence. And here is Jeffrey Epstein. So Jeffrey Epstein, he was born January the 20th, 1953. Okay, not an exact Saturn Neptune conjunction, but he definitely has a Saturn Neptune conjunction. And we've just had, was it the Justice Department saying that there's no evidence that Epstein blackmailed elites through his contacts and trying to get people, the elites to do things they shouldn't be doing, members of the elites. So he has that Saturn Neptune conjunction. He's very much tied into it, and he has this influence which isn't going away. Even though he's dead. And then there's the latest crop of Saturn Neptune conjunction people. We can't necessarily tell how it's going to work out. The example, well, Taylor Swift has a Saturn Neptune conjunction, and I mean, obviously she's not as interesting as the 1950s crop of people, and I don't think that she's going to have any lasting influence. But Saturn and Neptune, it's in a different sign. Okay, Saturn is in its own sign in Capricorn, and certainly Saturn and Neptune, you can see how if you're someone like Taylor Swift, it can really help you having a Saturn Neptune conjunction, because again, Neptune represents the collective, and if you've got Saturn Neptune conjunction, you can seize the collective and you can make it you, and you can sing to a large group of people, and you can represent their hopes, wishes, desires, fantasies, disappointments, and everything else. Though, of course, with her Neptune in Capricorn, you can see how she can actually sort of make money out of it. And that's perhaps part of the problem with Neptune in Capricorn. Neptune, I was asked, is Neptune in Capricorn a problem? Well, I think there is a sort of a negative association with Neptune in Capricorn. When I was studying astrology in the 1980s, I was reading this book which said that Neptune was exalted in Cancer. And I don't believe that Neptune's exalted in any sign at all, but there's maybe a positive association between Neptune and Cancer. And if there's a positive association between Neptune and Cancer, then you could say there's a negative association between Neptune and Capricorn. How can Neptune possibly transcend in Capricorn? Does that mean having Neptune in Capricorn is bad? No, it actually can be very good, because you can make money with this, by manipulating the collective. So here is an example of someone who's using it quite well. And another person with Saturn Neptune with a Saturn Neptune conjunction. I mean, there are loads of people who've got Saturn Neptune conjunctions in Capricorn. So this is very much a choice of people that's that I just happen to have looked at. Candace Owens, a sort of the YouTube commentator. She's quite into sort of conspiracy theories. I mean, she's into a conspiracy theory about another person with Saturn and Neptune, and that is, of course, Brigitte Macron. She has all sorts of ideas about Brigitte Macron and the gender of Brigitte Macron. So one Saturn Neptune conjunction person talking about another Saturn Neptune conjunction person, and with Saturn Neptune conjunction, maybe this that allows her to be successful, allows her to be a media YouTube star, helps her, reach out to a larger audience, because she's with it. She's got Saturn Neptune. She's got Saturn Neptune conjunction, and she is in touch with the Geist. She's in touch, with the spirit, and so is AOC. So AOC really is a politician with a Saturn Neptune conjunction, and I'm not convinced that one should be writing off AOC as a politician. My view is that there's a real chance that once the American economy really collapses, and I think the collapse will happen around the time of a Jupiter-Saturn opposition, sort of 2029, 2030. People like AOC are really going to come to the fore, and with her Saturn-Neptune conjunction, she has a constituency that she's plugged into, and she gets elected, and she might have her problems. I think there will be some times where she's not very effective over the next couple of years. She might even lose her seat in Congress. I haven't really predicted that yet, but I think she's got to be very careful. She's got to be very careful in the next election. But still, she's got this Saturn Neptune conjunction, and in the end, that will work for her. And I don't think her influence will go away. So how old is she now? 30. In 40 years' time, probably when I'm dead, people will still be thinking. When she's the age of 40 years' time, when she's not much older than Vladimir Putin is now, I think that she will still have a strong influence. Who knows? Maybe she'll get to the top of the greasy pole. I don't know. If I had to guess, I'd say she probably wouldn't quite make it. But because of that Saturn Neptune, she is able to constantly plug into a particular constituency, and she is able to talk to the fears and hopes of a certain group of people in the United States. So anyway, those are a few thoughts about Saturn and Neptune, and people who have Saturn and Neptune in their Saturn Neptune conjunction in their horoscope. I hope you enjoyed this video. If you did enjoy this video, I'd be very grateful if you were to like it. If you're not subscribed, super grateful if you were to subscribe. And if you want to buy me a coffee, there is a link in the description, and I will talk to you again tomorrow.